The heat at the Chang International Circuit doesn't just burn the skin, it melts resolve. In late February 2026, the MotoGP paddock arrived in Thailand with a singular narrative. Yamaha's Radical V4 project was a failing experiment. But as the sun dipped low over the final sector, a sound, sharp, mechanical, and violent tore through the humidity. It wasn't the smooth hum of an inline-four. It was the scream of a beast that had finally found its teeth. On the monitors, a number appeared that made seasoned crew chiefs drop their telemetry tablets. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, the man many said was too aggressive for the premier class, had just redefined what was possible on a Yamaha. No one inside the paddock expected what would unfold next. Just weeks after a disastrous showing in Malaysia, the Blue Rebellion had officially begun. The timing was staggering. This wasn't just a fast lap, it was a total demolition of the skepticism surrounding the 2026 season. But to understand how Toprak and Yamaha reached this explosive turning point, we have to go back to the humid nightmare of Sepang, where the dream nearly collapsed before it ever left the pit lane. The 2026 regulations were designed to level the playing field, but for Yamaha they felt like a death sentence. To survive, the Japanese giant had to do the unthinkable, abandon their legendary inline-4 DNA and build a V4 from scratch. It was a massive gamble, a Frankenstein project intended to marry Japanese precision with the raw, brutal power needed to combat Ducati and KTM. But at the Sepang tests, the honeymoon was over. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, the high-profile transfer from World Superbike, looked like a man who had made a catastrophic career mistake. The telemetry was a horror show. The V4's power distribution was unstable, surging at the exact moment Toprak needed to tip the bike into the corner. But the real crisis was the braking. Toprak is a rider who lives on the limit of the front tire, famous for his stoppy entries and impossible late braking. On the new V4, that trademark style was gone. The engine character felt unreliable, and the braking support was so inconsistent that even the stop phase king looked timid. Criticism from the European press was swift and merciless. Some analysts claimed Yamaha was half-baked, and Toprak was a rookie drowning in technical turmoil. Yet, as the team packed their crates for Thailand, a secret directive was sent to the factory in Iwata. Behind the closed doors of Yamaha's R&D department, the atmosphere was one of calculated desperation. They had 14 days to save their season. While the public debated Toprak's adaptation, engineers were dissecting the V4's internal configuration. The problem wasn't the amount of power, it was the violence of its delivery. Reports suggest that the technical team, led by Massimo Bartolini, initiated a total revision of the engine's firing order and electronic mapping. They weren't just looking for speed, they were looking for harmony. The main focus was a radical update to the mid-range power mapping. They needed to give Toprak a throttle that felt like an extension of his own hand, not a light switch that threatened to high-side him at every apex. They refined the engine braking to align with his extreme riding style, optimizing the cooling system to ensure that the performance didn't degrade under the crushing Thai heat. It was a race against time, with parts being flown directly from Japan to Buriram just hours before the green light. But would a few lines of code and a new firing order be enough to tame a bike that had looked untamable? When the garage doors opened at the Chang International Circuit, the tension was palpable. Toprak sat in his pit box, his body language rigid, staring at the screens. The first few runs were cautious, but then something changed. As the tires reached operating temperature, Toprak began to dance. In the long sector leading to turn 3, the Yamaha V4 didn't just accelerate, it lunged. The wheel spin that had plagued them at Sepang was gone, replaced by a clean, brutal thrust that kept the front end pinned to the asphalt. Inside the garage, whispers began spreading as the mechanics watched the GPS overlays. In the final sector, a zone that demands extreme front-end stability, Toprak was no longer fighting the bike, he was dominating it. The M1 no longer pushed the front end excessively, it followed his lead with a terrifying precision. His signature sliding control, a weapon that had been neutralized in Malaysia, had suddenly returned. But as the lap times began to tumble, a new shadow began to loom over the pit lane. Success in a MotoGP test usually brings smiles, but at Buriram it brought an eerie silence to the rival garages. Engineers from Ducati and Aprilia were spotted near the Yamaha pit, intently analyzing the sound of the V4. They weren't just looking at the top speed, they were looking at the exit. Data showed that Yamaha had fixed its primary weakness, slow corner acceleration. The V4's thrust now felt progressive, allowing Toprak to execute controlled slides that defied the traditional laws of traction. The mood in the paddock shifted from pity to alertness. While Toprak had been 19th and nearly 2 seconds off the pace in Sepang, he was now consistently haunting the top of the leaderboards. But this wasn't just a glory run on soft tires. The most striking detail was his consistency. Lap after lap, he maintained a race-based simulation that remained flat, with no drastic drops in performance. It was a statement of intent that left rival team managers looking visibly unsettled. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras. in a private debrief that would change the team's entire philosophy. In the heat of the afternoon, Toprak began to experiment. With the bike now responding to his inputs, he pushed the technical revisions to their absolute limit. Telemetry showed him opening the throttle earlier than anyone else while the bike was still at an extreme lean angle, a feat that was previously impossible on the V4. This wasn't just technical evolution, it was a psychological breakthrough. The synergy between the chassis geometry and the engine's firing order had created a dangerous combination. Toprak was now playing at the very edge of the Michelin tire's grip, using the V4's explosive power to steer the bike with the rear wheel. This sliding style, which many thought wouldn't translate from superbikes to MotoGP, was suddenly the most potent weapon on the grid. He was no longer a rookie trying to learn a machine. He was a master craftsman who had finally found the right tool. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely, as the team realized they hadn't just built a fast bike, they had built a disruptor. The narrative of Yamaha's decline collapsed in real time. By the end of the Buriram test, the criticism that had followed the team since 2024 had evaporated, replaced by a sense of impending chaos. Toprak's body language in the pit box was the clearest indicator of the shift. He was seen laughing with his engineers, pointing at telemetry data with a confident, relaxed expression that hadn't been seen since his championship-winning days in WSBK. The Blue Shift plan was no longer a corporate slogan, it was a reality. The technical crew worked with a renewed, focused aggression. They had refined the weight distribution to match the V4's output, creating a harmony that made the bike feel like an extension of Toprak's own body. The skeptics who called the project half-baked were now scrambling to explain how a team could find so much time in such a short window. Yamaha was no longer a manufacturer playing catch-up. They had become a serious contender for dominance in the 2026 era. But as the final session came to a close, a chilling realization hit the rest of the grid. Buriram wasn't just a test, it was a declaration of war. As the crates were packed for the season opener, the 2026 MotoGP landscape looked fundamentally different. The regulations regarding aerodynamics and electronic controls were supposed to slow the field down, but Yamaha had found a way to use those constraints to their advantage. Toprak's meteoric rise from the Sepang rife with criticism to the Buriram filled with hope had set a new standard for the entire paddock. The breakthrough in Thailand wasn't just an engine revision, it was a statement that the era of Japanese struggle was over. With a rider who can manipulate the limits of physics and an engine that finally matches his ambition, the 2026 season is no longer a foregone conclusion for the European manufacturers. Yamaha is ready to shake the world. But as the lights prepare to go out for the first race of the season, one question remains. Can this radical harmony hold under the heat of a real, 22-round battle, or was Buriram just a beautiful, fleeting illusion? What happened next left even his closest team members stunned.